I was riding in a taxi when a series of soft gasps emanated from my phone. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror and laughed. Bro, where did you find this kind of video? This soft voice is really getting to me. I'm almost feeling it myself, bro. Share the link. I looked up with a cold expression and responded, This is the security footage from my living room. The driver froze, his grin fading. He quickly averted his gaze and remained silent. I let out a chilly laugh, turned my attention back to the footage on my phone, and continued watching. I mused to myself that if I hadn't wanted to surprise Sophie, I wouldn't have abruptly cut my business trip short. I wouldn't have checked the home security to see if Sophie was home, and I wouldn't have discovered her activities with that man. In the footage, Sophie was smiling, seemingly enjoying herself, while the man appeared to be putting in extra effort, almost as if he wanted to lift and start exercising. Moments later, the driver cleared his throat twice and awkwardly announced, Sir, we've arrived at your destination. His curious gaze lingered, but I paid him no mind. I exited the car, barely registering my steps, moving like a zombie. Soon, I stood before my door. I raised my hand to knock, but then let it fall back. It was absurd, knocking to enter my own home. I pulled out my phone and called the chairman of the company. I've made up my mind. I'm willing to take the position of general manager at the branch overseas. On the other end, I heard a hearty laugh. Ha ha ha, I'm glad you figured it out, but this will make things tougher for your fiancé. I heard you two are getting married soon. I chuckled lightly, exchanged a few pleasantries, and hung up. Marriage. What a nightmare. Just as I ended the call, the door opened from the inside. Sophie appeared surprised to see me and instinctively stepped in front of the Noah. David, what are you doing back? She asked. I looked into Sophie's surprised face and replied indifferently, The business trip went smoothly. I finished the task ahead of schedule, so I came back, although I was speaking to Sophie. My gaze didn't leave Noah's face for a second. Noah seemed uneasy under my stare, adjusting his collar to hide bright red marks on his neck. Before I could inquire further, Sophie smiled and pushed Noah forward. Let me introduce you. This is Noah, my distant cousin. He's visiting the city for the first time and didn't have a place to stay, so I invited him to stay with us. As she finished, Noah extended his hand. Hello. Sophie often mentions you. You must be David, right? Sorry for the trouble I've caused you lately. I glanced at his outstretched hand and casually slapped it away with the back of my hand. Sophie frowned in displeasure. David, what are you doing? Noah's my cousin. You should be polite to him. Internally, I sneered. Cousin. So this is what happens when people start having an affair. Yet I couldn't understand how Sophie, after being together for over a year and only separated for a few days, had developed feelings for Noah so quickly. What had transpired during my half-month absence? I chose not to expose them. Noah sensed my hostility and awkwardly withdrew his hand. He pulled Sophie toward the stairs, heading downstairs. First time meeting you. Let me treat you to a meal as a thank you for taking care of my cousin, he offered. I watched them walk side by side, feeling a mix of confusion and resentment. Previously, Sophie would have greeted me with a hug, and we'd enjoy activities together. Now, her entire attention was on Noah, barely acknowledging me. I followed them downstairs silently, my heart heavy. At the restaurant, Noah looked at Sophie with a doting smile. Sophie, should we stick with the usual? She nodded, completely ignoring me as she stood beside him. They resembled a couple who had known each other for years, understanding each other's habits and preferences. Noah glanced at me smugly and said, The dishes I've ordered are all Sophie's favorites. I hope you don't mind. I forced a smile and replied casually, Of course not. Every time I ate with Sophie, I made sure to order what she liked. It wasn't a big deal for me. However, Noah had ordered only beef. He nodded and sat down next to Sophie, leaving the seat across from me empty. When the waiter brought the dishes, he complimented them, saying, This gentleman and lady look really perfect together. You must be a couple, right? Noah, pleased by the comment, waved and handed several bills to the waiter as a tip. The waiter's eyes widened in surprise, accepting the tip eagerly with a broad grin. He wished them good luck before leaving. Sophie was caught off guard, lowering her head shyly but didn't deny the gesture. I sat across from her, staring intently as if trying to bore a hole into her face. What? Are you mute? Can't you even argue back? My questioning tone caused Sophie to raise her head in displeasure. She snorted. Look at you, acting all petty. Do I need to explain myself every time someone misunderstands me? Seeing her anger, Noah immediately began patting her back reassuringly. Don't get upset. It's not worth it. Let's not be angry. When the food arrived, Noah was the first to pick up some beef with his chopsticks, lovingly saying to Sophie, Sophie, eat more. Look at you, you're getting thinner. Then he placed another piece of beef into my bowl. Squinting slightly, he added, You should eat more too, just to thank you for taking care of Sophie. In just half a month, they had become so familiar with each other that every gesture from Noah made me feel like an outsider in my own home. Sophie said, David, this beef is really delicious. You should try it. Her eyes sparkled as she urged me to eat, but I set my chopsticks down, memories of our years together flooding my mind. I first met Sophie in the hospital, rushed there due to an allergic reaction to beef. When I opened my eyes, Sophie was in the bed next to mine. Her face was pale, her head wrapped in bandages, but her beauty still shone through. I fell in love with her at first sight and did everything I could to create opportunities to be close to her. The nurses informed me that Sophie had been in a car accident and had lost all her memories. She didn't know who she was or what she did. Everything was a blank slate. Determined to help, I sought the police's assistance to find her name and identity. She was an orphan, raised in an orphanage, and after turning 18, she had planned to find her first job when the accident occurred. Moved by her story, I offered her a position as my secretary and provided her with a room in my home since she had nowhere else to stay. Over time, under my persistent pursuit, Sophie's heart gradually opened and we officially became a couple. 5 years of love passed, and I treated her better and better, almost fulfilling her every wish. Sophie loved to travel, so I always made time to accompany her. She enjoyed baking, so I paid for classes and bought her all the necessary tools. She liked wearing dresses, so I cleared out a room for her clothes. Even when busy with work, I set aside 1 day a week to spend time with Sophie, enjoying little romances together. Our relationship grew stronger, and we even talked about marriage. Although Sophie had already agreed to marry me, I still wanted to propose in a romantic way, so I ended my business trip early, hoping to surprise her. But now Noah's appearance had completely shattered everything. While he was around, Sophie didn't even spare me a glance. Noticing I hadn't touched my food, she frowned and urged, What are you waiting for? Eat! Her voice pulled me out of my memories, and I glanced at the beef in my bowl, feeling a surge of disgust. I'm allergic to beef, I replied. Sophie covered her mouth and laughed, mocking, You're allergic to beef? We've been dating for 5 years, and I didn't know that. Her laughter trembled with amusement as she naturally leaned into Noah's embrace. In my heart, I sneered. She still remembered she was my girlfriend. I almost wondered if Sophie had been replaced or if she had lost her memory again, but she hadn't. She didn't even intend to confess anything about her relationship with Noah. After dinner, Sophie kindly picked up a napkin and started wiping Noah's mouth. I sat there, my hands clenched tightly under the table. On the way back, Sophie skipped along, holding Noah's hand and smiling happily. Halfway there, she turned around and said to me, David, let's set our wedding date for next Monday. If we wait another day, Noah will have to leave. Her tone was more of an announcement than a discussion. I nodded indifferently and replied, Fine. For me, the timing of the wedding didn't matter because I no longer wanted to marry her. I had no interest in marrying a woman who had betrayed me. When I returned home, I walked to my bedroom door only to find everything on the shelf gone. I turned around and questioned who had moved my things. Noah approached slowly, his steps heavy, and said harshly, Why are you being so aggressive? What if you scare Sophie? I replied, I just thought those decorations were ugly, so I packed them up and threw them away. They weren't valuable anyway. Was it really necessary to get this angry? Plus, you're a grown man, and you've got embroidery fans in your room. Aren't you afraid of people making fun of you? Noah looked at me with disdain and a hint of sarcasm. Seeing that he admitted it, my anger flared. Before he could react, I swung my arm and landed a punch squarely on his face. Sophie, passing by, saw this and rushed over to support Noah, her face full of concern. She asked, Noah, are you okay? Does it hurt? The next moment, she turned and yelled at me, David, what's wrong with you? Is it really necessary to hit him just because he moved a few things? I had mentally prepared myself for Sophie to defend him, but seeing her stand firmly by Noah's side, my anger turned to pure resentment. I pointed at Noah and shouted, Those things are mementos from my parents. How dare you throw them away? While Sophie was trying to comfort Noah, she froze at my words. Her eyes flashed with guilt as she avoided meeting my gaze, but I wasn't going to let her off the hook. I stared directly at her and said, You know how much those things mean to me. Who does your so-called cousin think he is? Touching my stuff? It's lucky of me to just hit him. My voice grew louder with each word, and Sophie trembled slightly at my outburst. She remembered that I had once told her the embroidery fans in my room were the last creations of my late mother. My mother had been a master of intangible cultural heritage, and during a trip to study embroidery techniques, she tragically died in a landslide, buried forever under the mountain. Unable to bear the loss, my father sank into despair and eventually passed away as well. In just 1 month, I lost both of my parents and couldn't even see them one last time. At that time, I had been on a business trip. My father, afraid I would worry, never told me about my mother's accident. When he passed away, the hospital called me. That period had been a deep wound in my heart, and I remained in grief for a long time. Only Sophie had helped me pull myself together bit by bit. A sense of guilt rose in Sophie's heart. She wanted to apologize on Noah's behalf. Just as she was about to speak, Noah interjected, I'm sorry, I didn't know the significance of those things. I can always buy a few identical fans and replace them. Hearing this, I shoved Sophie aside and landed another punch, this time on his nose. Through gritted teeth, I said, How about I remove your arm and give you a prosthetic instead? Seeing me hit Noah again, any remaining guilt Sophie might have felt disappeared entirely, replaced by annoyance. She frowned sharply and said, All right, it's just some objects. They've already been thrown away. What more do you want? Besides, he's apologized to you and you're still going at him like this. Isn't that a bit too much? Watching Sophie side with Noah, I couldn't help but feel bitterly amused. The person who once gently helped me through my darkest times was now standing with someone else, criticizing me together. I didn't say anything else and turned to leave. Watching my retreating figure, Noah furrowed his brow, tugged at Sophie's sleeve, and with a pitiful tone asked, Why did he leave? Doesn't he want me to stay here? Sophie gently patted his back and replied softly, It's fine. He's probably just jealous. Leave him for a day or two and he'll come around. This wasn't the first time she'd done something like this. I had spoiled her too much. Every time she frowned, I wanted to give her the world to make her happy. As the general manager of a listed company, I even wore a frog costume in the scorching heat of over 40 degrees Celsius for an entire hour just to surprise her. When we had disagreements, Sophie never needed to back down. All I had to do was stay calm for 2 days, and then I would return, grinning and trying to make her happy again by buying her various bags and jewelry. But this time, Sophie miscalculated. Perhaps because I'd pampered her too much, she mistakenly thought that no matter what wrong she did, I would always forgive her after I left. I went straight to the office. The company in China was in its off-season, so there weren't many documents to handle. By the time it was quitting time, Kelly was surprised to see I was still in the office. She opened the door and asked curiously, Mr. Wong, you usually rush home to be with your girlfriend by this time, don't you? Why haven't you left today? I looked up from a pile of documents while sitting in my swivel chair, gave a casual smile, and replied, I still have some work to finish. You can go ahead. Kelly, feeling awkward, left, wondering if there had been a fight between us. After everyone left, I finally let out a sigh of relief. I pushed all the documents aside, rested my head on the desk, and fell asleep. For several days in a row, I didn't go home. This made Sophie anxious. She feared that this time I was genuinely angry, so she called me first, hoping to smooth things over. She said, David, we're getting married next Monday, just 5 days away. How about we go wedding dress shopping tomorrow? At the sound of her words, my eyes suddenly lit up, realizing that Sophie had put a huge green hat on me. I needed to prepare a special gift for her, making her the most eye-catching bride. I agreed immediately, already planning my next step in my revenge scheme. Sophie, hearing my agreement, smiled brightly. When Noah walked over and saw Sophie smiling so happily, he asked curiously, What's going on? What's making my Sophie so happy? I casually wrapped my arm around her waist. Sophie smiled proudly and raised an eyebrow, saying, I thought he would be so stubborn and sulk for a long time. I didn't expect that as soon as I asked him to go wedding dress shopping, he agreed without hesitation. I knew it. He was totally in love with me. Hearing this, Noah affectionately patted her head and said, My Sophie is so beautiful. It's only natural that men fall for her. The next day, I took an early shift and went to the wedding dress store Sophie had mentioned. When I arrived at the door, I saw Noah in a suit, helping Sophie zip up her wedding dress. Sophie had her head tilted, her long, wavy hair flowing down her smooth white shoulders. They looked like a couple of models from a wedding poster radiating love. The photographer couldn't resist snapping a picture of the scene. He handed the photo to Noah and Sophie, praising them with a smile. You two are the most perfect couple I've seen in days. A perfect match, handsome and beautiful. I couldn't resist capturing this moment. Consider it a wedding gift from me. Sophie took the photo first, looked at it, and then covered her mouth, giggling. Noah leaned in to take a look, his face also breaking into a contented smile. I suddenly spoke up. How come I didn't know? So you two are really a couple. I stuffed my hands in my pockets, my voice laced with irritation. Hearing this, Sophie looked up, displeased. She asked, Why are you being so jealous for no reason? You're late, and now you're making sarcastic comments. The staff, seeing the scene, wisely exited and closed the door behind them. They'd seen all sorts of strange things in their line of work and were long used to such drama. Noah wrapped his arm around Sophie's waist and gave me a challenging look. He said, With your behavior, I don't feel comfortable leaving Sophie with you. I let out a cold laugh and responded indifferently. Is that so? If you're so worried, why don't you two just get married? The agreed time was 6 p.m. I had arrived at 5:30, but still ended up being blamed for being late. I turned to leave, but just as I was about to go, Wait, Sophie. Hearing I was about to call off the wedding, she rushed over, lifting her wedding dress as she hurried to my side. She said, Don't be so petty. Okay, my cousin is just worried about my future happiness, so he's being difficult. You didn't even try to make a good impression, and now you're giving us the cold shoulder. Do you think that's right? I narrowed my eyes. The image of the surveillance footage from that day flashed in my mind, the picture quality so clear that I could see every drop of sweat on Sophie's face. Her words were truly absurd. I stared at Sophie for a long time before finally asking, Do you love me? She replied, Of course I do. But whether it was a betrayal of the spirit or the body, both were unforgivable in my eyes. If her heart was still with me, but her body had already betrayed me, it would only make me feel even more disgusted. She asked, David, how can you doubt me after 5 years of our relationship? Sophie's eyes were full of tears, as if she were about to break down at any moment. She grabbed my arm, looking pitiful, begging me not to leave. We promised to choose the wedding dress together, and I want to wear the one you personally pick out to marry you. At her words, I suddenly smiled, curling the corners of my mouth. Since she was so eager to marry me, I would grant her wish and give Sophie a wedding she would never forget. With this thought in mind, I looked around and quickly spotted the store's most expensive gown. I'll take this one. Only the most expensive wedding dress can match you. I called over a staff member and quickly paid. Soon the staff delivered the dress into Sophie's hands. She happily went to the fitting room to try it on. At that moment, Noah slowly approached me, arms crossed, sneering as he said, "Can't you tell the person Sophie loves is me? If you're smart, you'll step aside immediately." I couldn't help but laugh at his words and replied, "So what? The person she's marrying is me." Noah's face instantly darkened. He gritted his teeth and said, "Don't get too happy too soon. You're not married yet. Sophie will be mine sooner or later." Hearing that, I remained indifferent, let out a light laugh, and turned to leave. I didn't care who Sophie would marry in the end. After leaving the wedding dress shop, I drove back to the company. I was about to start a new position at the overseas office in 2 days, so there was a lot of work to hand over. The fitting room curtain was pulled open, and Sophie stepped out with a smile. She eagerly asked, "David, do I look good in this wedding dress?" But before she finished her sentence, the smile on her face froze. She furrowed her brows and asked, "Where's David?" Noah smiled softly and sadly. "He left right after you went in." He looked at Sophie with a playful expression and whispered, "All along, you were so devoted to him, swearing that he would forgive you unconditionally no matter what. But from what I see, he doesn't have you in his heart. If he did, why would he leave a beautiful bride and go off to play dress-up with his so-called cousin? I believe no man would tolerate that. So, what do you say? How about you marry me in 2 days?" The moment he finished speaking, Sophie slapped him across the face. She shouted, "Noah, I warn you, stop it. Whatever happened before, at least now, I can say for sure that the person I love is David." With that, Sophie turned and went back into the fitting room to change out of the dress. Noah, completely stunned by the unexpected slap, stood there dazed. Then, as if struck by a sudden thought, a smile crept onto his lips. He silently vowed in his mind, "One day you will be mine." The next day, I surprisingly went home to grab my ID and household registration book. When Sophie saw me come back, her face was full of concern. She said, "David, it's already almost noon. What would you like to eat? I'll make it for you right away." Sensing my deliberate distance, she began to panic and even started thinking of ways to please me. I shook my head and coldly replied, "I have work to do at the company. I'll eat out." Hearing this, Sophie's face fell with disappointment. At the same time, Noah, who had been leaning against the wall, saw everything unfold. He thought to himself, "This is bad. After I finally managed to smooth things over with Sophie, David comes back and ruins everything." An hour later, while I was at the company dealing with documents, my phone suddenly buzzed several times. It was a message from Noah. "Do you prefer hyaluronic acid or the regular kind?" Attached were pictures of several big-name condoms. A minute later, Noah retracted the message and added, "Oops, sent that to the wrong person. You're in Sophie's profile. Pictures are too similar." Although Sophie and I did have matching couple profile pictures, they didn't look that much alike to cause confusion. Clearly, Noah had intentionally sent that message to me. Was he trying to make a move on Sophie tomorrow? I didn't call out his poor acting and simply replied casually, "Oh." Seeing that, Noah instantly lost his composure. He asked, "Are you free tonight? I have something I want to talk to you about." At 7 p.m., in the cafe downstairs from my company, the coffee in front of Noah remained untouched as he stared at me intently. "I'll confess, I'm not Sophie's cousin," he said. I took a sip of my coffee and nodded indifferently, replying, Seeing my reaction, a hint of confusion appeared on Noah's face. He asked, "You're so calm. Could it be that you already knew?" I didn't respond, but from his look, Noah seemed to have figured something out. "Since that's the case, I'll be straightforward," he continued, not holding back. He revealed that he and Sophie had grown up in the same orphanage and had fallen in love before she lost her memory. They had planned to start their life together, but after Sophie went for a job interview, he never heard from her again. Without cell phones back then, he had to wait at the rented apartment, hoping she would return. After over half a month, he had to accept that Sophie had left, thinking she found him too poor and rejected him. It took him a long time to move on, and only recently did he receive news about Sophie, realizing she hadn't left him, but had lost her memory. He felt like the newcomer and believed he should step aside. I was a bit surprised and said, "So you two already knew each other. That explains why your relationship developed so quickly." I had always been curious about it, but now that I have the answer, I can hardly believe it. After so many years of love and effort, I'm the third party. However, something about Noah's story seemed off. When Sophie disappeared, why didn't he call the police but instead waited in the apartment? These things didn't matter anymore. I asked directly, "So why are you telling me all of this now? I wasn't interested in playing games or wasting time." Seeing an opportunity, Noah couldn't wait to say, "If I can prove that Sophie still loves me, will you step aside?" His eyes were full of certainty, as if he was sure Sophie still loved him and that I would just give in. I glanced at him nonchalantly and nodded lightly. "Sure." Seeing that I agreed, Noah quickly pulled out his phone and dialed Sophie's number. He spoke to her in front of me. "Sophie, tomorrow you're going to marry David. I have one last wish. Could you fulfill it?" Sophie was silent for a moment before asking, "What's your last wish?" Noah smiled and softly said, "I want to hear you say that you love me again." There was a long pause before Sophie's voice came through, "I love you." Satisfied with the answer, Noah blew a kiss to the phone and hung up with a smile. He looked at me triumphantly and said, "How's that? Tomorrow you should know what to do, right?" After saying that, he didn't wait for my response and stood up to leave. I slowly took another sip of the coffee on the table. No sugar or milk. Slightly bitter with a lingering aftertaste. For Sophie, I had already let go. She was like coffee. Bitter enough to make me frown, but after swallowing, a bit of sweetness lingered. I craved that tiny bit of sweetness. But when I tried to taste it again, it was all bitterness. It wasn't until today that I truly let myself go. When I saw the surveillance footage, I had hated Sophie and Noah, hated myself for misjudging people, hated that I was too busy with work and gave Noah a chance, and hated myself for being so indulgent with Sophie, letting her believe that no matter what she did, I would always love her. When I got home, Noah's room was closed tightly, and he must have already been asleep. At that moment, Sophie came out of her room holding a well-tailored suit and held it up in front of me. "I know you're busy with work, so I had this suit custom made for you. Tomorrow, when you wear it, you'll be the handsomest groom." I took the suit with a neutral expression and said, "Thank you, Sophie," showing a rare wife-like side, only doing these things when she sensed my coldness and detachment, thinking I might give up on the relationship. "David Wong," Sophie called my full name. She hesitated for a moment and then asked, "You'll come to the wedding tomorrow, won't you?" They say a woman's intuition is the most accurate. She must have felt that my feelings for her had faded. In the past, no matter how much she misbehaved, I would indulgently look at her and say, "I really can't do anything about you." But now, even though she had carefully arranged this suit for me, I only glanced at it. As I reached the door, I heard Sophie's voice. I didn't turn around, but replied in a low voice, With that, I went back to my room and closed the door. I looked at the custom-made suit in my hands, perfectly tailored. I tried it on, and it fit well. It was surprising that Sophie remembered my measurements so precisely. Perhaps, in her heart, she was struggling as well. On one side, there was her boyfriend from before the memory loss, and on the other, her boyfriend after it. If she had to choose between the two, it must have been quite difficult for her. Since that's the case, I'll be the bigger person and make the choice for her. I wrote a farewell letter and tucked it under the sheets. That night, the hours felt particularly long. I gazed out at the city lights, unable to sleep, as time quietly slipped away between my fingers. I didn't notice when the dark night outside faded, replaced by the faint light of dawn. Before I knew it, the wedding had begun smoothly. When Sophie saw me in the custom suit, she finally smiled. She looked particularly beautiful today. The waistline of the wedding dress had been altered to perfectly highlight her stunning figure. Guests all around praised her. "This is the most beautiful bride I've ever seen. If I'm not mistaken, this wedding dress is a piece by Master Maori worth 10 million gikoin ade, 10 million for a wedding dress. This wedding is extravagant. The bride is so lucky." Sophie, hearing all the compliments, lowered her head shyly. At the same time, the MC raised the microphone and loudly announced, "Next, let's welcome the groom." The whole hall erupted in warm applause. Some guests, just friends of the family, had never seen me before and were eagerly awaiting the appearance of this groom worth millions. At that moment, I had already changed out of my custom suit. I knocked on the door of the groomsmen's lounge and called Noah out. When Noah saw that I'd changed out of the suit, he raised an eyebrow and asked, "Have you figured it out?" I gave a cold laugh and threw the suit at him. "I wish you both a lifetime of happiness with that." I turned and left. The car arranged by the company to take me to the airport was already waiting at the hotel entrance. Without hesitation, I opened the car door and got in. The midday sun streamed through the car window, bathing my face in warmth like a new beginning. In the hotel lobby, the guests' applause continued for half a minute, but the groom's figure was still nowhere to be seen. The MC seemed a little awkward. He cleared his throat and explained, "Perhaps the groom is a little nervous and didn't hear our call." The next second, he raised the microphone to his mouth and increased his volume. "Let's give an even more enthusiastic round of applause to welcome the groom." As soon as he finished speaking, the applause grew louder on stage. Sophie bit her lip, her hands tightly clutching the hem of her dress. She had an unsettling feeling in her heart. Someone shouted, "The groom's coming! He's coming!" Noah slowly walked up from the back of the hall. The guests' applause grew even more enthusiastic. "They're a perfect match, a handsome couple. Such a beautiful bride deserves such a handsome groom." At this moment, Sophie couldn't hear the applause from the guests. She looked at Noah beside her, confusion written all over her face. She asked, "Why is it you? Where's David?" She didn't lower her voice on purpose, and everyone in the front row, including the MC, could hear her clearly. The experienced MC caught the hint in her words. He held the microphone but didn't rush to continue with the ceremony. Noah, under questioning, lowered his voice and quietly said, "I told him everything." David said, "He blesses us. He's already gone." When Sophie heard this, her pupils dilated in shock. She shook her head in disbelief and screamed, "No, that's impossible." With that, she lifted her wedding dress and ran out of the hotel. As Sophie ran out, she saw me getting into a car. She screamed in anguish, "David, you promised to marry me. Why are you breaking your word?" The only answer she received was the dust kicked up by the car speeding away. She kicked off her high heels and grabbed the hem of her dress as she chased after me, shouting, "David, I love you. Come back to me." Outside the hotel, the main city road was congested with traffic. The car I was in had excellent soundproofing, so I didn't hear Sophie's cries or see her chasing me. I hadn't slept well the night before. As soon as I got in the car, I buckled my seatbelt and closed my eyes, resting. In the rearview mirror, Sophie came to a desperate halt at a crossroads, but was struck by a car coming from the side. Blood spilled everywhere. Noah, who had caught up, saw the scene and shouted anxiously, "Sophie!" Soon, Sophie was rushed to the hospital. Her pure white wedding dress had been stained a vivid red. Outside the emergency room, Noah anxiously said, "Doctor, please, you have to save her." The doctor politely replied, "We will do everything we can." As the lights in the operating room went out, the doctor emerged, drenched in sweat. Noah, who had been waiting by the door, immediately asked, "Doctor, how is she?" The doctor removed his mask and truthfully replied, "The patient is temporarily out of danger, but she suffered a severe blow to the head. We can't rule out the possibility of a concussion." Upon hearing this, Noah breathed a sigh of relief. As long as she's fine. After Sophie was transferred to a regular hospital room, Noah followed the nurse to handle the payment. Sophie, lying on the pristine white bed, felt as though she had just woken up from a long, long dream. In the dream, she lived in a place filled with many children. She had always been cute, and other children liked her, fighting to play with her, except for one. He was 3 years older with a cheeky face. Using his age as an advantage, he forced other kids not to play with Sophie. His daily amusement was bullying Sophie. During meals, he would steal the chicken drumstick from her bowl. When walking, he would tug at her hair and even snatch the snacks the director gave her. This continued until Noah grew up and entered society, when things gradually improved, but the good times didn't last long. Sophie had spent 3 peaceful years, and at 18, it was time for her to step into society. That day, as she was about to take a taxi for an interview, she was suddenly stopped by Noah. He stroked his chin and leered at her. "Little Sophie, I didn't expect you to be 18 so soon. You look even prettier now. It's worth waiting outside for you for 3 years." As he spoke, he began to make inappropriate advances toward Sophie. Realizing something was wrong, Sophie immediately turned and ran. Noah chased her relentlessly as Sophie glanced back in fear. She was struck by a car coming from the opposite direction. When she woke up in the hospital, she had forgotten everything from the past. She didn't know who she was or where she came from. A fellow patient in her ward, a caring brother, stayed by her side while she recovered. He helped her find her name and background. It turned out she was an orphan with no family to love or care for her. I felt sorry for her and arranged a light job for her. Over time, as we spent more time together, I began to aggressively pursue her, and gradually Sophie developed feelings for me. She agreed to my pursuit, and we became a couple. We dated for 5 years, and by then my career had progressed. Before I left on a business trip, I proposed to her verbally, and Sophie happily agreed. But 2 days after I left, a familiar face appeared at the door. Noah. Somehow, having gotten her address, he saw her and immediately called out her name, hugging her joyfully. He told Sophie that they had grown up together in the orphanage. They had been deeply in love and even lived together in a rented apartment. But one day, Sophie suddenly disappeared and he couldn't find her. He thought she had abandoned him. He searched for Sophie for 5 years. Sophie didn't believe him at first, but when the orphanage and the name matched, she had no choice but to believe him. However, she already had a boyfriend. She tried to convince him to break up, but Noah wouldn't give up. He said that unless Sophie agreed to be with him one more time, he would keep pestering her. He also threatened to send videos from their past to David if she didn't comply. He forced himself on her while threatening her. In the end, to prevent David from learning about this past, she reluctantly gave in. However, after a few days, Noah still showed no signs of leaving. He said, "Unless you show me that David loves you more than I do, I won't let go." Sophie, eager to cut ties with him, immediately agreed. Later, to prove my love for her, Sophie repeatedly provoked me. She was certain that I would never give up on her, but things didn't go as expected. At the wedding, I left. Sophie, in an attempt to get me back, got into an accident. As Sophie reflected on everything, she covered her mouth and cried. She hated Noah. She hated him not only for causing her memory loss, but also for making her lose her true love and ruining the happiness she was about to receive. When Noah returned after paying, he was still holding a box of millet porridge. He looked at Sophie, smiling as he said, "Sophie, it's not that I don't want to give you the best. The doctor specifically told me that you need to eat porridge these next few days." He set up a small table, opened the box, and scooped a spoonful of porridge, blowing on it to cool it down. Once it was warm, Noah brought the porridge to Sophie's lips. Sophie looked at her enemy, her eyes welling with tears, but she stubbornly refused to let them fall. Noah asked, "What's wrong?" Seeing Sophie's tears, Noah raised his hand to wipe them from the corner of her eyes. Are you still sad about David leaving? I've already told you. He never loved you as much as you thought. Sophie's eyes, like two pools of water, stared fixedly at Noah. She turned her head to avoid his touch and coldly spoke. I remember now. I remember everything. At these words, Noah's hand holding the porridge shook involuntarily, his expression cracking suddenly. His words became stammered. You already know. Without Sophie answering, her cold expression made it clear she had remembered everything, including how Noah used to bully her and how he had deceived her. However, his panic was brief, and Noah quickly regained his composure. He let out a light laugh and said, Since that's the case, I don't need to pretend anymore. Anyway, you're already mine now. You have no choice but to marry me. Upon hearing this, Sophie could no longer suppress the anger within her. She raised her hand, wanting to slap Noah, but he gripped her wrist tightly. Noah raised an eyebrow, mocking her. Sophie, can't you see the situation? David doesn't want you anymore. You're mine now. The certainty in his eyes was like a thorn, digging into Sophie's heart, constantly reminding her. It was she who had pushed away the person she loved the most. Tears streamed down Sophie's face as she cried out in anguish. No, I love him. I only love him. Her loud cries attracted a few onlookers peeking through the door. Noah glared at them and growled, What are you looking at? Haven't you seen an argument before? Meanwhile, I had already landed and arrived on the other side of the Atlantic at the new company. Everything was going smoothly, except for the woman I encountered on my way home who tried to scam me. Her name was Anna, and she was from my hometown, they say. Old friends meet with tears in their eyes, but my encounter with Anna was more of a comedy than a reunion. One day, I was driving as usual when a woman with a bun suddenly darted out from the roadside. Thankfully, I reacted quickly and wasn't driving too fast, managing to stop the car in time. Anna was frozen in place, dazed and unable to recover for a while. Not far away, two men in black suits were shouting at Anna. Quick, chase her, she's over there. Upon hearing this, Anna immediately snapped out of her daze. I opened the car door to check on her injuries, but unexpectedly, Anna, like a rabbit, quickly jumped into the passenger seat, shouting, Get in, drive, quickly. I glanced at the two black-suited men getting closer and, without hesitation, got back in the car and sped off. Anna looked at the men in the rearview mirror, who were now far behind, and began laughing uncontrollably in the passenger seat. She gave me a thumbs up and praised me. Nice job. I chuckled softly and casually asked, Where do you live? I'll take you home. There was silence in the passenger seat for a while. I turned to look at her and saw her pouting, looking at me with a pitiful expression. She said, Are you just going to hit me and then not take responsibility? My leg still hurts, and you're going to just drop me off at home. Anna blinked, forcing out a couple of tears. Hearing this, I was at a loss for words, torn between laughing and crying. I chuckled and asked in confusion, Did I hit you? Upon hearing this, Anna nodded eagerly, Yeah, my knee still hurts. She held her right knee and looked at me with teary eyes. I furrowed my brows. I clearly remembered that I hadn't hit her. After I'd stopped the car, Anna had been standing. The injury couldn't have been caused by me. She must have slipped while dodging those two black-suited men. However, I didn't call her out on it. Instead, I just smiled at her. Seeing that I didn't question her, Anna continued, You hit me, so now you have to take responsibility for my life. Now take me to your house. I'm hungry. I wanted sweet and sour pork. Make it for me. She crossed her arms and said matter-of-factly. I nodded and silently changed direction. Okay. Seeing me change course, Anna quickly tightened her seatbelt, eyeing me with caution. She asked, What are you planning to do? You're not going to sell me, are you? Upon hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. A mischievous thought crossed my mind, and I said, Isn't it a bit late for you to be scared? At these words, Anna's eyes widened, and she pressed her hands to her chest, shouting loudly, Are you going to rob me of my money or my body? Seeing that Anna was genuinely scared, I couldn't help but laugh. All right, all right. I won't tease you anymore. You wanted ribs, right? I'm going to the supermarket to buy some for you. I guess that Anna was probably a young lady from a wealthy family who wasn't happy with her family's arrangements, so she ran away on her own. The two men in black earlier were probably her bodyguards. They didn't want to harm her. They just wanted to take her back. Hearing this, Anna shyly smiled, her eyes turning into crescent moons. She said, "Hee hee, sorry, I misunderstood." I smiled casually and said, "It's fine. I hope Miss Young Lady won't mind visiting my humble abode." At these words, Anna's heart skipped a beat, and she nervously swallowed. She asked, "You know already?" Anna was puzzled. She was wearing very ordinary clothes, and there was no distinguishing mark on her face. "How did you know?" I didn't answer her. Instead, I pulled over to the side of the road, unbuckled my seatbelt, got out of the car, and went to the supermarket to buy ribs and other ingredients. When I came out, Anna was leaning on the car window, bored, tapping on the glass. As soon as she saw me, she straightened up and waited for me to get in the car. Once I was back in the car, Anna couldn't wait to ask, "You're really interesting. You just accept everything I say without arguing, or do you often lead other clueless girls into your traps?" I was amused by her words and gestured with my hand, inviting her to speak. "If you're worried, you can get out now. It's still not too late." Upon hearing that I was about to kick her out, Anna immediately grabbed her seatbelt and shook her head violently. She said, "No, I don't want to leave. I was just joking. I know you." Now it was my turn to be confused. I squinted at Anna, thinking for a while, but I couldn't recall where I'd met her. Anna saw this, smiled, and said, "Drive on. When we get home, I'll tell you." Since she had already said this much, I didn't ask any further. In no time, we arrived at my place. As soon as we walked in, Anna made herself at home, sitting on the couch, turning on the TV, and laughing aloud at the funniest scenes. I shook my head with a smile and headed to the kitchen to start cooking. Half an hour later, I brought out a plate of beautifully cooked sweet and sour ribs. As soon as Anna smelled the aroma, she jumped up from the couch. "It smells so good. I'm not dieting today. I'm going to have 2 bowls of rice." I looked at Anna. Her figure was well proportioned, neither too fat nor too thin, just perfect. She didn't need to diet at all. I thought this to myself and said it out loud. Anna heard this and laughed. "Thank you. If I ate your cooking every day, I'd definitely never lose weight." From this, I gathered that she probably planned to stay long-term. But since we were alone together in one room, it wasn't great for Anna's reputation. I tried to persuade her to leave after dinner. However, this struck a nerve with Anna. She put down her bowl, still chewing the food in her mouth, and immediately said, "I'm not going, brother. David, you want to kick me out? You're so heartless." Hearing this, I frowned and asked, "Brother, I don't remember having a sister." Seeing that I'd completely forgotten her, Anna stared at me with a resentful gaze that made me uneasy. She said, "When we were little, you even spanked me. Don't you remember?" At this, everything clicked in my mind. I remembered it all in an instant. It turned out that Anna and I had a past connection. Our fathers had been good friends for years, and when the adults were having tea and chatting, we would be playing nearby. Anna had been mischievous as a child, always causing trouble at home. She once ruined a model airplane I had spent 3 months putting together. At the time, Anna didn't care and casually said, "Don't worry, I'll buy you another one." Furious, I pushed her against the wall and spanked her, saying, "Do you know what you did wrong?" Later, her crying had drawn the attention of the adults, and I didn't escape a beating either. Even years later, thinking about it, my bottom still aches. Seeing my expression, Anna playfully punched my arm and laughed. After she had enough of laughing, she pointed to her face and said, "Surprised? I turned out so pretty when I grew up? Are you regretting spanking me now?" While cleaning up the dishes, I teased, "I do regret it. Regret not spanking the important parts." Anna hadn't expected me to be so unconventional, completely different from her usual suitors. She quickly stepped forward to help with the dishes. I'll do it. You cooked, so I'll wash the dishes. That's the rule of freeloading. I couldn't help but laugh as I watched Anna, who had completely taken over the couch, pushing me to one side. She was just like when we were kids, big, carefree, and totally without any ill intentions. Even if she had some schemes, they were written all over her face, like a naive beauty. Anna stayed at my place, and while I went to work during the day, she slept in until noon, waking up whenever she felt like it. When she was hungry, she'd raid the fridge, and in the afternoon, right before I got off work, she would message me her food order. After work, I'd go buy the ingredients and come back to cook for her. Our life together felt like that of a young couple in love. Anna's father knew she was at my place, so he finally stopped worrying and pulled back the bodyguards who had been tracking her. He figured it was better for her to stay with me, someone he knew well, rather than out there with some unknown guy. After all, we were essentially just brother and sister, so there was no reason to worry about anything inappropriate happening. Anna had been staying with me for half a month when her father finally couldn't wait any longer and called me. He sighed and pleaded. David, my daughter has always been mischievous. She ran away because she didn't want to meet the matchmakers I arranged for her. I'm sorry for the trouble she's caused you these past few days, but she's old enough now. She can't just stay single forever, can she? Her mother and I can't take care of her forever. I understood his concern and immediately assured him, Don't worry, Uncle. I'll talk to her and help her sort things out. But Anna was determined to stay at my place. No matter how much I tried to persuade her or pleaded, she refused to leave. In fact, she even wanted to take charge of the house. Every time I came home, I would find Anna showing off various sexy nightwear, but I deliberately kept my eyes straight ahead, which made Anna groan in frustration. She draped her arm over my shoulder and couldn't help but ask, Do you have some kind of illness? Otherwise, how can you resist me? A big beauty like me. I raised an eyebrow, gently grabbed Anna's arm, and pushed her up against the wall in a playful manner. Anna's eyes widened in shock as she forgot to breathe, and it seemed like the only sound in the world was the rapid beating of her heart. Her shy expression was imprinted in my mind. I lowered my voice and spoke. Now, do you still want me to fall for you? The consequences won't be something you can handle. As soon as I finished speaking, Anna's lips pressed against mine. In that moment, my heart skipped a beat. I had originally just wanted to tease her, but I never expected Anna to be serious. Worried she might regret it later, I reached out to push her away, but Anna held onto my hand tightly, her eyes hazy as she looked at me. She said, I like you. I've liked you for a long time. Let's be together, okay? After saying that, she leaned in even closer. This time, I was a normal man. After being teased every day, now with her soft and warm body in my arms, I couldn't hold back any longer. Meanwhile, back in China, Noah's true nature was exposed. He no longer pretended to be the affectionate guy. He brought Sophie back with him, locking her up at his house, not allowing her to go out or contact anyone. Sophie's eyes were swollen from crying, and she asked him with red eyes, Why? What do you get out of this? After driving me away, he had locked her up. Sophie really couldn't understand his motives. Noah lit a cigarette and started smoking, blowing out smoke rings as he raised an eyebrow and looked at Sophie. Why? Don't you see how I feel about you? Why do you only like that man? What does he have that I don't? At these words, Sophie furrowed her brows in confusion. From her memory, Noah had only ever bullied her and later developed inappropriate feelings, just wanting to take advantage of her. What kind of love was that? Noah reached out to touch Sophie's face, and the moist sensation on his fingers was from her tears. His expression turned violent as he angrily pressed the cigarette butt into Sophie's shoulder, causing her to cry out in pain. Seeing her suffering, Noah suddenly smiled, grabbing her chin in a possessive way as he spoke almost obsessively. Sophie, you're mine, and only mine, as far as I know. Before David left, he left you a sum of money, right? If you're smart, you'll give me all of it. Noah was always like this. He wanted the person and the money. Sophie glared at him, her chest tight with pain, but she didn't make a sound. Everything changed when Noah's facade crumbled, revealing his true intentions. The turmoil between Sophie, Noah, and me had escalated beyond repair, leaving all of us entangled in a web of deceit, betrayal, and unresolved emotions. She had already betrayed David, and her only remaining task was to safeguard the money he had left behind. This responsibility was the sole source of her peace. Observing Sophie's silence, Noah let out a cold snort and pushed her aside. With a mocking grin, he remarked, "So stubborn, huh? Are you that attached to David? Fine, stay here and go hungry." Without another word, Noah stormed out the door. After ensuring Noah had truly left, Sophie slowly rose from the floor. For the past 2 weeks, she had been confined, continuously brainstorming ways to escape. Noah's constant vigilance had left her with no opportunities. Now, with her escape plans firmly in mind, she was ready to execute them. Swiftly, Sophie made her way to David's bedroom and tore the bedsheets into strips. David's room was the only one with a window, providing her the means to create a rope to descend and climb out from the 4-story height, a challenge she was prepared to handle. As she shredded the sheets, a piece of paper fluttered to the ground. Her keen eyes spotted her signature on it, prompting her to pick it up quickly. The note read, "To my beloved Sophie." Overwhelmed, tears streamed down her face uncontrollably, resembling a dam breaking. She tried to stifle her sobs, covering her mouth to prevent any noise. The more she read, the deeper her heart ached. David had written, "Sophie, by the time you read this, I will have already left. The 5 years we spent together were the happiest of my life, and I love you deeply. I understand your feelings for me are genuine, but before your memory loss, you already loved someone else. Choosing between two great loves is difficult. Sometimes those involved can't see the truth, while outsiders can. I can sense it, Sophie. Since Noah entered your life, your love for him has become clearer, so I've decided to step back and let you be with him." Sophie's tears soaked the letter, obscuring David's name. She desperately attempted to dry them, but the more she wiped, the darker the ink became. Eventually, she folded the letter and placed it in her bag. Her immediate priority was to escape. Grabbing her bank card, she climbed down the makeshift sheets and headed to the nearest police station. Noah was apprehended for breaking into a private residence and illegal detention, resulting in a 15-day detention period. During this time, Sophie sold the house and transferred all the money into her account. Subsequently, she visited the company where David had worked. Sophie had always entered and exited the company alongside David, earning the envy of many employees. The building seemed permeated with the sweet memories of their time together. Upon her arrival, the receptionist greeted Sophie warmly. "Miss Liu, did you come to retrieve something Mr. Wang left behind?" Sophie shook her head and inquired, "Is David not in the office?" The receptionist looked puzzled and responded, "Mr. Wang went overseas half a month ago." "As his partner, didn't you know?" Sophie quickly fabricated a reason, saying, "He only mentioned a business trip. Our 5th anniversary is approaching, and I want to surprise him. Could you provide the address of the overseas office?" The kind-hearted receptionist promptly wrote down the company's foreign address on a note. 2 days later, while at the office for a business discussion, the receptionist approached Sophie, whispering, "Mr. Wang, someone is looking for you outside." Assuming it was Anna, Sophie excused herself from her business partner and followed the receptionist. Entering the break room, she was shocked to see someone she never expected to encounter again. Sophie slowly stood up, forcing a smile, and raised her hand to greet him. "It's been a long time." Seeing Sophie, David felt his legs turn to lead, rendering him immobile. After a prolonged silence, he responded indifferently, "It's been a—" Sophie, trying to conceal her inner pain, managed a strained smile. She requested, "Give me some time. Can we talk?" Her eyes sparkled with hope. After contemplating briefly, David nodded. He knew Sophie well enough to understand that if she had something on her mind and didn't address it, she wouldn't find peace. Agreeing, He sent a message to Anna informing her, "I'm meeting an old friend tonight, so I won't be able to cook for you. You'll have to fend for yourself." Anna responded with a sad emoji, followed by a voice message saying, "I'm punishing you. Bring me some small cakes when you return." Smiling, David replied, "Okay, at the cafe." Eventually, Sophie couldn't contain herself and began to sob loudly. Onlookers turned their attention to them, making Sophie feel uneasy under the scrutiny. She whispered, "Miss Lou, if you keep crying like this, people might think I'm bullying you." Hearing this, Sophie ceased her crying, wiped her tears, and apologized. "I'm sorry. I've been through so much lately." Since going abroad, David had stopped paying attention to matters back home. To him, it seemed Sophie should now be happily with Noah. Sophie gazed at David quietly, as if trying to memorize every detail of him. David asked, "You've lost weight. Have you been very tired recently?" At his words, Sophie couldn't hold back her tears any longer. She cried silently, choking as she confessed, "David, my memory has returned." Hearing this, David's fingers trembled. He looked away and said, "So, are you here to thank me for making the right choice for you?" Sophie's eyes reddened as she shook her head vehemently. "No, no, that's not it. We were both deceived by Noah." She recounted everything that had happened. David was stunned upon hearing the truth. He had never imagined Noah had manipulated both of them. Sophie cried, clutching his hand. "David, I saw the letter you left for me. I know you still care, and I've always had only you in my heart. Can we get back together, please?" David had felt a whirlwind of emotions. Although he had been hurt before, after Noah's revelations, he had moved on. He had a new life and Anna. He was planning to visit his father-in-law with Anna in a few days, but now Sophie had appeared. He pulled his hand back, leaned against the chair, and looked at Sophie seriously. "It's impossible between us, Miss Lou. The past is the past. Let it remain there. I already have a girlfriend now. We can't go back." Sophie's pupils dilated in shock. She cried and shook her head, shouting, "It's impossible, absolutely impossible. You love me so much. How could you fall for someone else so quickly? You must be making excuses to push me away." Her tear-filled eyes sought confirmation, but reality didn't align with her hopes. David shook his head coldly and distanced himself. "Miss Lou, if you have nothing else to say, let's end it here. I have things to deal with at home, so I'm leaving now." With that, he turned and walked out. Upon returning home, David was surprised to see several dishes on the table. His favorites: braised ribs, cola chicken wings, and meatballs. Before he could react, Anna emerged from the kitchen holding 2 bowls of rice, smiling warmly. "How's it going? Am I good cook? Having a girlfriend like me must mean you're secretly enjoying these dishes. These are things I've learned to make by watching you, since I usually do all the cooking and never get a chance to show off. But today, since you were busy, I had the opportunity to shine." Seeing Anna's joyful expression, David was infected by her happiness and laughed. "Why are you still standing there? Go wash your hands and eat." Hearing Anna, he snapped back to reality, quickly washed his hands, and eagerly sat down to eat. He complimented her, saying, "I didn't expect you to have such talent," and devoured his food, savoring every bite. Anna watched him and smiled contentedly. At that moment, there was a polite knock on the door, 3 gentle taps. Anna, puzzled, asked, "Who's at the door? Could it be someone from your company?" David thought, "No way, you're so busy today. It's been so long since work ended, and now someone's coming to find you at home." Curious, he set down his chopsticks and went to open the door. When he did, he saw a familiar face: Sophie. His smile froze instantly. Sophie chuckled and said, "David, don't you want to invite me in for a seat?" Seeing that he had opened the door but didn't invite her in, Anna approached. She casually placed her arm around David's shoulder and smiled. "What are you standing there for? Come in and sit." When Anna appeared before Sophie, Sophie finally understood that David hadn't been lying to her. Everything he had said was true. It all made sense. She realized he had never deceived her, not even a white lie. Despite his sincere honesty, she had lost him. Sophie looked into David's eyes, which were filled with tears. She said, "David, I have something I want to talk to you about. Could you give us a moment?" Anna pointed at herself in confusion and asked, "Me? But we don't even know each other." David felt awkward, fearing Sophie might take advantage of Anna. Sophie noticed his concern and gave a helpless, bitter smile. She said, "Don't worry, I won't do anything to her. Besides, this is your home. What are you afraid of?" Sophie's words dispelled David's doubts. With Anna's consent, he entered the room, leaving space in the living area for them. Once seated, Sophie stared intently at Anna as if looking through her to someone else. Anna, confused, touched her face and asked, "Is there something on my face?" Sophie smiled and replied, "No, you're very beautiful. David is lucky to have such a wonderful girlfriend like you." Hearing the compliment, Anna laughed happily. Sophie continued to gaze at Anna, and through Anna's innocent smile, she seemed to see her former self from years ago, the one who had first met David. After a moment, Sophie took a bank card from her pocket and placed it in front of Anna. She explained, "I'm going back to my country. I may not be able to attend your wedding. This card has a little money on it. Consider it my wedding gift to you. I hope you won't reject it." After saying this, she stood up and left. Despite Anna's attempts to call after her, Sophie didn't stop. Seeing that David had moved on and found someone new seemed to burn her heart with intense pain. Even though she was reluctant to let go, she couldn't deny that David had found someone better, and there was no reason to ruin that. All she could do was offer her blessings. After Sophie departed, David emerged from the room, and Anna immediately pointed at the bank card on the table, laughing. "Your friend is really something. Not only does she give a wedding gift in advance, but it's a bank card." David followed her gaze and saw the familiar bank card on the table. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked in the direction Sophie had left and exhaled deeply. That night, David recounted everything about his past relationship with Anna. Initially, Anna couldn't believe it. Amnesia was typically something seen only in TV dramas. Although she had survived 2 car accidents, she eventually sighed, "It's just fate. Miss Lou and you have a deep connection, but no destiny." David turned to her, smiled slightly, and softly said, "Don't worry, when I loved you, my heart was completely yours." Hearing his promise, Anna smiled sweetly, hugged him, and gave him a light kiss on the cheek. After leaving David's house, Sophie didn't immediately return to her country. Even though she had said she would let go, she still couldn't bear to leave him. She wanted to see him, to watch him find happiness, and to witness his daily joy. Though it was morally wrong to interfere in someone else's happiness, Sophie couldn't control her longing until Noah came searching for her. Seeing Noah's face again made Sophie shiver with fear, fearing what he might do. Observing Sophie in this state, Noah grinned and stepped closer. "What's the matter? Hasn't it been just a few days? Don't you recognize me anymore? We were so close back then." Noah lifted Sophie's chin with his hand, a nostalgic look in his eyes. Sophie nearly collapsed, the painful memories of the past flooding her mind. She cried, pleading, "Please, I beg you, leave me alone. You've already destroyed me. What else do you want?" Seeing the tears, Noah furrowed his brows and feigned sympathy. "Sophie, why are you crying? I love you so much. You should be happy." Suddenly, he slapped his forehead as if having an epiphany and threatened, "Are you still thinking about David? If you can't forget him, do you believe I won't send our intimate video to him? If he sees how sweet we were, he'll surely support us." After this, Noah reached out to wipe Sophie's tears, but she turned away, spat at him, and whispered, "Ugh, you're the scum of society, a complete lunatic." Mentioning David, Sophie couldn't hold back anymore. She had tolerated Noah's mistreatment, but if he involved David, she would fight him to the bitter end. Noah raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Sophie's defiance. He laughed. Oh, still protecting him? Do you think that if he doesn't know about the video, he'll change his mind? He's already fallen for someone else, hasn't he? With each word Noah spoke, Sophie's heart broke further. Gathering her courage, Sophie grabbed Noah's collar and shouted, "What right do you have to say that? You're the root of all this. If you ensured I couldn't find happiness, then I won't let you have it either." She shoved him into the corner of the wall, choking him. Noah's eyes widened with disbelief as he saw the murderous intent in Sophie's gaze. However, the strength between them was unequal. Before Noah could react, he casually flicked his hand and pushed Sophie aside. Straightening his clothes and adjusting his collar, he sneered, "A woman who plays both sides. I've been so good to you, yet you're still thinking about that man. Is it just because he's richer than me? Just you wait. One day I'll be wealthier than him, then you'll be mine." From the look in Noah's eyes, Sophie sensed something was amiss. She squinted and asked, "What do you want?" Noah didn't respond, only smiled mysteriously before taking Sophie away. Just like before, he imprisoned her once again, binding her and throwing her onto the bed. She looked at Noah in terror and shouted, "You're crazy. I'd rather die than like you. The only person I love is David." She couldn't comprehend how someone who had bullied her as a child now, as an adult, had become obsessed with her. Learning from his previous mistake, Noah chose a room without windows this time, except for when Sophie needed to use the bathroom. He kept her hands bound and never left her side. Even during meals, he personally fed her. "Sophie, just wait and see. David may be doing well now, but in half a month, he'll be a complete mess." Observing Noah's sinister smile, Sophie furrowed her brows, a sense of foreboding rising within her. "What are you going to do? I warn you, don't harm David." In response, Noah only offered a playful smile. Half a month later, after finishing some business at the company, David took Anna to visit her parents. He had someone purchase a box of Anna's father's favorite liquor and some bird's nest for her mother as gifts. Upon entering, he greeted them warmly. Mr. and Mrs. Wong, I've come to see you." They were delighted to see him and invited him inside. "David, come in. What a rare guest. The last time we saw each other was, 10 years ago?" David nodded awkwardly and explained, "Mr. and Mrs., I was recently transferred abroad. The company's been busy, so I didn't get the chance to visit sooner." "It's my fault." Hearing his apology, they waved their hands dismissively. "No problem. Young people are busy. It's good. Look at you, coming all this way with such expensive gifts." However, their smiles faded as they noticed something was off. Their gazes landed on the hands Anna and David were tightly holding. The most reactive was Anna's father, who screamed, "What's going on with you two?" Anna raised their intertwined hands and smiled. "As you can see, we're in love." Seeing the proud look on his daughter's face, Anna's father felt heartbroken. He had believed that pairing his daughter with David would be the safest choice, but now he realized that the safest place had become the most dangerous. At that moment, he deeply regretted it, but seeing the affection between them, he knew it was too late to change anything. David lightly coughed and covered his mouth, saying, "Mr. and Mrs. Wong, please rest assured, I will take good care of Anna from now on." Hearing this, Anna's father and mother exchanged a look. Anna's mother was the first to accept the situation, believing David was a solid, driven person and that being her son-in-law wouldn't be bad. However, Anna's father still felt a blockage in his chest. His precious daughter, whom he had carefully raised, had rejected the wealthy oil tycoon and diamond prince he had selected for her, choosing instead someone like David, an ordinary man worth only a few million. Just as he was about to voice his disagreement, he saw his daughter's joyful smile, and the words he was about to say got stuck in his throat. Anna grabbed her father's hand and coquettishly said, "My dearest daddy, I know the reason you pushed me to arrange blind dates before was because you wanted what was best for me and my happiness. But my happiness is David. Please accept him." After being bombarded with her sweet words, Anna's father sighed helplessly and nodded in resignation. After the meal, as Anna and David were preparing to leave, David's phone rang. "Mr. Wong, something's wrong at the company." After answering the call, his face darkened. Anna, concerned, asked, "David, what's wrong? You look terrible." Hearing Anna's words, David forced a smile, patted her head, and reassured her, "It's nothing. There's just some business at the company I need to handle." After sending Anna home, he rushed to the company without delay. Upon entering the office, he saw Noah sitting in a chair, his hands casually folded on the desk, looking both lazy and dangerous. Noah greeted him. "Long time no see." David shoved his hands into his pockets, giving Noah a cold stare, and asked sharply, "Don't tell me you came to my company just to catch up." Noah smirked. "Of course not. I came here to make a bet with you. If I win, you give me your entire fortune. If I lose, I'll give you 1 billion. How about it?" David furrowed his brow, thinking, how did I not know Noah could come up with 1 billion? Even if he had that kind of capital, I have no reason to bet with him. With that thought, he immediately declined. Noah seemed to have anticipated this and raised the stakes. "Sophie is in my hands. If you don't accept the bet, I'll kill her." Hearing this, David's patience snapped, and he couldn't help but rush at Noah. "You said you loved her. Is this your so-called love?" Noah's mouth bled from the punch, but instead of being angry, he just laughed. "Ha ha ha, who's the one called love? It's always you. It was easier to deceive her when she had amnesia, but now that her memory's back, she refuses to be with me. If that's the case, maybe it's better to let her die." David couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked in confusion, "What do you want to bet on?" Noah replied, "Let's bet on next week's bidding competition. If you lose to the other company, then you lose. Otherwise, I lose. How about it?" With blood still on his lips, Noah smiled sinisterly, sending a chill down David's spine. David stared at him intently, trying to read something from his face. In the next moment, he simply agreed. Fine. He was confident he could win against the other company in the bidding competition the following week. David's entire fortune was just a few million, so he believed he could win. However, despite this, seeing the certainty in Noah's face made him uneasy. When he returned home that evening, he was distracted, forgetting to change his shoes upon entering. Anna gently patted his head, and after ensuring he wasn't running a fever, quietly asked, "Did something happen at the company?" David sighed and pulled her into his arms, recounting everything that had occurred at work that day. After listening, Anna furrowed her brows in confusion. The other company is full of industry insiders, so anyone could tell they have no competitive edge. Why is Noah betting on them to win? They discussed it for a while but couldn't reach any conclusions. About an hour after work ended, the secretary, who should have already left, sneaked back into the office. She quietly opened the password-protected safe where David had locked the bidding documents, copied a set of files, and then carefully returned them to the safe. After doing this, she took the documents and went to see Noah. She said, "I've done what you asked. Now, can you let my family go?" Noah smiled as he took the documents, checking them carefully. After confirming their authenticity, he spoke. "What's the rush? Don't worry. After tomorrow's bidding victory, I'll make sure your brother appears before you whole and unharmed." Having received this promise, the secretary left reassured. On the morning of the bidding competition, before leaving, David checked the bidding documents again. Noticing that the hair strands on the documents were still in place, he felt a sense of relief as he headed to the competition. To his surprise, the other company's documents were identical to his. As expected, he lost the bid and was kicked out of the competition venue. As he exited, he saw Noah leaning casually against the wall, looking at him with a smug expression. "You lost? Now it's time to fulfill your promise." With that, Noah pulled out a transfer agreement and pointed to where David was supposed to sign. "Just sign here." David took the agreement, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Noah continued, "I've waited a long time for this moment. I want to prove that I'm stronger than you. I am the one Sophie should love. You lost, David. From today on, you're worthless. David nodded in grim resignation and took the pen from Noah's hand. Just as he was about to sign, he snapped the pen in half. Why should I sign? He asked. Noah was speechless, stuttering. We agreed on this, didn't we? David sighed and replied, No, you misunderstood. It was just a joke. Why are you taking it so seriously? Why are you blowing it out of proportion? Noah's face turned red with anger, and he charged at David, ready to strike. At that moment, Sophie suddenly appeared from somewhere. She shoved Noah aside, grabbed the agreement from David's hand, and tore it to shreds. Noah, you're insane. I have all the evidence of your crimes. I've already called the police, and they'll be here soon. Noah's eyes widened in shock when he saw Sophie. How could she have escaped? He had tied her up, and there were no sharp objects in the room. How had she managed to break free? Sophie ran her hand through her messy hair, sneering as she spoke. It shouldn't have been possible, but you made a mistake by kidnapping the wrong person. Noah had kidnapped her brother to force her to help him, using his life as leverage, but he hadn't realized that her brother was a retired soldier. He easily untied himself and was about to leave when he found another woman tied up in the next room. He rescued Sophie as well. After that, he went to the police, and knowing that Noah would harm him, Sophie immediately came to David's rescue. She glanced at him, relieved to have arrived in time. In the past, David had always protected Sophie, clearing obstacles for her. This time, it was her turn to shield him from the storm. Realizing his own mistake that allowed Sophie to escape, Noah felt regret, but quickly shrugged it off. He gritted his teeth and said, It's fine that you escaped. Now let's see how David loses to me. Sophie, I am the one you should love. He grabbed Sophie's hand and placed it on his chest, urging her to feel his heartbeat. Disgusted, Sophie pulled her hand away and stepped in front of David. Crazy, you can still turn yourself in once the police arrive. You won't be able to escape the accounts in both the domestic and foreign markets. They need to be settled together, and your bribery of the secretary to steal business secrets will get you a long sentence. At her words, Noah raised both his hands, clutching his head, and laughed manically. Ha ha ha, you're really going to oppose me like this? Sophie's response was left unanswered as the sound of police sirens in the distance indicated there was no turning back. After handing over all the evidence to the police, Noah was arrested and taken away without resistance, denial, or any extreme actions. Before leaving, Noah glanced at Sophie, a smile curling at the corner of his lips, but Sophie didn't notice as her full attention was on David. She reached out to touch his face, but hesitated and pulled her hand back. Taking a deep breath, she struggled to hold back her tears. This time, I finally managed to help you. Sophie smiled, her eyes filled with deep affection. David turned his gaze away and looked at Anna, who had just arrived. Anna, didn't I tell you it's nothing? Why are you here? Anna looked at Sophie and then remembered everything David had told her earlier. Her eyes dimmed slightly, and she calmly said, I was worried about you, so I came to check on you. For a moment, the atmosphere between the three of them became tense. Sophie broke the silence, speaking first. Anna, there's something I want to talk to you about. Is it okay if we step aside for a moment? She glanced at David, her voice trembling as she added, Please, I need to borrow your girlfriend for a while. Fearing David might object, Sophie forced a smile and jokingly said, Don't worry, I'm not going to eat her. David opened his mouth to refuse, but before he could say anything, Anna's voice intervened. That's fine. There's a coffee shop over there. Let's sit and talk. Anna pointed to a nearby pavilion and walked ahead. Sophie followed closely behind. As soon as they sat down, Sophie spoke directly. I can't let go of David. Can you give him back to me? Her eyes were red and her eyelids were swollen. Seeing Sophie in such a pitiful state, Anna's heart clenched painfully. She tightly gripped her coffee cup, her lips pressed together in silence. Seeing Anna begin to soften, Sophie continued, I believe David has already told you about me. I came here to seek his forgiveness, to rekindle our relationship, but now he's with you. I thought I could let you two be happy together, just watching him live a good life. But I realized I can't do it. I love him. I can't live without him. I can't go on a single day without him. I beg you, please, give him back to me. I'll do anything you want." Sophie grasped Anna's hand, crying out in anguish. Anna looked up, staring intently at Sophie, the tearful woman before her. Anna felt a little sympathy for Sophie's situation, but replied, "Feelings can't be forced. If David still likes you, I won't be able to take him away. On the other hand, if he doesn't feel the same about you, even if I step aside, he won't be with you." Anna spoke calmly, but her words deeply struck Sophie. Sophie swept her hand across the table, throwing her coffee onto the ground, and shouted, "No, as long as you step aside, David will change his mind and get back together with me." Anna tilted her head and smiled, raising an eyebrow. "Really?" She took out her phone, dialed David's number, and called him over. David, worried about Anna, had been waiting nearby. He could clearly hear every word they were saying. "Sophie, what we had is in the past. When I loved you, I had no regrets. And when we broke up, I had nothing to apologize for." Sophie shook her head, shouting loudly, "I love you too, and when I loved you, I didn't wrong you. Then why can't we be together anymore?" Looking at Sophie, who was crying uncontrollably, David rubbed his temples and spoke coldly. "Do you dare say you didn't wrong me?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for Sophie to hear. Sophie froze as the memory of her intimate moments with Noah flashed through her mind. She lost her confidence, clutching her hair in frustration as she spoke painfully. "But," David sighed and continued, "it doesn't matter whether you had amnesia or what your state of mind was at the time. The fact is, you betrayed me. As lovers, no matter what happens, we should be honest with each other and solve things together, not like you, who not only betrayed me, but also hurt yourself in the process." At this point, Anna stood up, placing one hand on David's shoulder in approval. Sophie sniffed, looking at the affection between Anna and David, realizing they could never return to how things were. She wiped her tears, supported herself on the chair, and stood up. "But you were the one who spoiled me the most." "Right. You always forgave me whenever I did something wrong. Why is it that this time, even though I'm apologizing, even though I'm begging you, you still won't forgive me? Don't people all make mistakes? I just went down the wrong path. Can't you forgive me once more? I promise. This will be the last time. I'll be good from now on." Seeing that Sophie wasn't getting through to him, David grabbed Anna's hand, interlacing their fingers, and turned to leave. "I only left a few words in the air. The bidding matter. I could handle it without you. So please, stop disturbing our lives." After saying goodbye to Sophie, Anna and David began discussing their wedding plans. Both were around 27 or 28, and Anna's family was pressing her about it. Once they set a date, David carefully planned a proposal. On the largest cruise ship, in the middle of the deck, Anna was surrounded by everyone, wearing the most beautiful and dazzling dress. As David knelt on one knee holding a diamond ring, one that symbolized a lifetime, under the witness of the twilight. With the evening breeze and the scent of the sea, he asked loudly, "Anna, will you marry me?" Anna gasped in surprise, her happy tears flowing from the corners of her eyes. She shouted into the wind, "Yes." Her answer was carried by the wind to every corner of the cruise ship, and everyone around them cheered and blessed their love. On the deck, they embraced each other in happiness. Below deck, Sophie stood with a wine glass in one hand, her eyes slightly wet behind her sunglasses. She deliberately shifted her gaze, clinking glasses with a handsome blonde-haired, blue-eyed man at the same table. Since David and Anna now had their own happy life, maybe it was time for her to move on and seek her own happiness. A month later, Anna and David's wedding day finally arrived. David's parents had long since passed away, and he didn't have many close friends, so they decided to have the wedding abroad. In the center of the venue, Anna, dressed in a diamond-encrusted wedding gown, stood next to David in a formal suit, looking like a match made in heaven. The priest gave them his blessing, and their friends and family offered their warmest congratulations. At that moment, Sophie stood outside the venue, dragging her suitcase as she walked step by step toward the airport. As their vows echoed through the ceremony, she was returning to her home country. The departure of one person is always accompanied by endless loneliness. Sophie couldn't help but think that perhaps when David left, he felt the same way, full of sadness but also relief after letting go. After the plane landed, hearing the familiar sounds of Mandarin around her, Sophie truly felt she was starting anew with the remaining money she had. She rented a small apartment and found a job at a nearby supermarket, just enough to get by. The person in charge of taking care of Sophie had a bad temper. Whenever she made the slightest mistake, he would start yelling using vulgar language. "I don't understand how a clean little girl like you can be so dumb. I've told you so many times. The pull tab on the canned drinks has to be facing down. If you can't remember this, just get lost. Stop acting like you've never worked before, so dumb and clueless." Sophie silently listened, inwardly reflecting that she truly hadn't had much work experience. She had been well protected by David, like a flower in a greenhouse, never having faced any storms. But now her greenhouse was gone, and she had to learn to face life's challenges on her own. She lowered her head and kept apologizing. "I'm sorry, it's my fault. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. I'm sorry, I will correct my mistake." Days passed, and Sophie gradually adapted to her new life. Though sometimes she felt exhausted and wanted to sleep, and at times she would feel nauseous. One day, Sophie received a phone call from the police station. It was Noah, wanting to meet with her. Hearing Noah's voice again, Sophie had already let go of the past. She replied calmly, "There's no need for us to meet anymore, is there?" On the other end of the line, Noah chuckled lightly, his voice hoarse. "Sophie, I have some good news to tell you. You have to come." Curious about the news, Sophie went to the prison to see him after work. Noah had been sentenced to 5 years and had only been incarcerated for a few months. Sitting across from Noah, who had a scruffy face, Sophie took the phone and asked, "What is it?" "Just tell me quickly," Noah teased her deliberately. "Don't you feel something strange in your body these days?" Hearing this, Sophie furrowed her brows. She thought back over the past days but couldn't find anything unusual. Sophie glared at him and coldly replied, "If you're not going to tell me, I'm leaving." As she said this, she was about to hang up. Noah immediately widened his eyes and anxiously shouted, Wait, I'll tell you." At his words, Sophie put the phone back to her ear. Noah chuckled and said, "You're pregnant with my child. I told you. You can only belong to me in this lifetime." Upon hearing this, Sophie was struck as if by lightning, standing frozen in place, unable to respond. When she finally came to her senses, she stood up in agitation, looked into Noah's eyes and shouted, "What did you say? How could I be pregnant with your child?" Seeing Sophie's reaction, Noah burst out laughing. "Ha ha ha!" Sophie frantically slapped the glass, demanding an explanation. Finally, the prison guard had to push her back into her seat. Sophie took a deep breath, calmed herself, and then asked, "Tell me why?" After Noah stopped laughing, he picked up the phone again and spoke in a low voice. "You were already pregnant when you had the car accident. If you calculate the dates, it's my child. That's when I decided I wanted to have you completely. As for before, I just wanted to play with you and make some money off you." Upon hearing this news, Sophie's mind exploded. She hung up the phone and immediately went to the hospital for an examination. The report showed that she was 4 months pregnant. Sophie couldn't believe it. Gently touching her stomach and recalling the earlier bouts of nausea, she had no choice but to accept it. This was another huge blow to her. Sophie had finally managed to forget the harm Noah had caused her and had just begun a new life. But now, because of the child, she was entangled with him again. She pounded on her stomach in frustration, wanting to get rid of it. But when she looked up, she saw a woman pushing a baby stroller walking by. The woman was gently singing a lullaby, slowly pushing the stroller, soothing the baby to sleep. The baby in the stroller looked up at Sophie, smiling and giggling at her. The woman noticed the report in Sophie's hand and kindly pulled her aside, smiling as she said, "You're pregnant, aren't you? Are you a little scared?" She noticed the tears in Sophie's eyes, raised her hand and gently wiped them away. "When I was pregnant, I was scared too, just like you. I was so upset I could cry, but now that my baby is here, looking at her makes me happy. Come over and take a look. She's so cute." Sophie leaned in and took a glance. The baby seemed so full of life, staring at her with wide eyes and smiling. This changed Sophie's mood. She gently touched her own belly. Inside, there was also a life as lovely as that. The grudges of adults shouldn't involve the child. The child was innocent. She made the decision to keep the baby and give birth to him. 6 months later, Anna and David returned to their country. Anna looked at David's hand holding hers as he helped her down the plane, unable to resist teasing, "Hey, I'm just pregnant, not handicapped. There's no need to treat me like a princess." David smiled indulgently, supporting Anna as she disembarked the plane and said gently, "You are my princess, and besides, now that you're carrying the fruit of our love, I have to treat you even better." Anna's eyes narrowed with a smile upon hearing this. She said, "I knew I was right from the beginning. Well then, in appreciation of your attentiveness, I'll allow you the chance to take care of me." At her words, David bent down slightly and joked, "Thank you, Princess, for giving me this opportunity." Since becoming pregnant, Anna had become more sentimental. She grew up in their country and wanted their baby to be born there. So David applied for a transfer at work, and they moved back. After settling into their new home, Anna looked around, and then, holding her belly, playfully said to David, "David, our baby is hungry and wants some steak. Is that okay?" She winked at him, amused. David patted her head and affectionately said, "Of course, we can have steak." As they walked downstairs, Anna and David passed a supermarket. Anna was feeling thirsty, so they went inside to buy 2 bottles of water. Just as they grabbed the water and were heading to the checkout counter, David saw Sophie, who was restocking shelves while pushing a small cart. She also had a baby on her back, sleeping soundly in a swaddle. Even the motorcycle speeding outside the supermarket didn't disturb the baby's peaceful sleep. As soon as Sophie lifted her head, she saw Anna, with her large belly, and David carefully protecting her, afraid the shelves might bump into her. Sophie glanced at them, then lowered her head, pushed the cart, and turned to leave. The past was behind them. Now they were on separate paths, living their own lives. Meeting again only brought unnecessary trouble. Anna had just finished paying and was calling David to go eat steak when she noticed he had been staring in one direction for a long time. But when she looked over, there was nothing there. Anna couldn't help but ask, "What were you looking at just now?" Hearing Anna's question, David withdrew his gaze, shook his head, and replied, "It's nothing. Let's go eat steak. You and the baby must be tired. I should treat you both well." Sophie and David had long been people on separate paths. Seeing each other now and pretending not to know each other was the best outcome for them, leaving the past behind in the crowd.